in these hard times, what's better than a lot of good stories? So thank you so much for coming out tonight. Our MC, Maureen Aylward, who's really been an incredible supporter of Gloucester Fishtails, was unable to be here at the last minute. So I stand here as MC, storyteller in residence, and I think that's enough. So for our first story tonight, we have Gail Cv Gay. Many people might have known her in Gloucester in a former life as an artist, and she left and became a minister. And in her own words, she came back to Gloucester to die. But she's still fully alive, so let's give her a hand.
Well, I was at a Writers' Center event when an acquaintance came up to me and said, "Are you still a minister?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I will never, ever forgive you for deserting art for religion." I had no idea I needed to be forgiven, but I blame it all on the Gloucester sea serpent. So let me go back to the beginning. Long time ago, I lived in Lanesville. My husband and I shared a great art studio. Our son had lots of friends at Plum Cove Elementary School, and I was a founding member of Center in Maine, a feminist cooperative art gallery. Paradise. Then I had a dream, one of those unusual, vivid, memorable ones, where I was on the Catabus with my son, but it was an unusual bus load because every artist that ever lived or died in Lanesville was on that bus, from Walker Hancock, who was then still alive, to Virginia Lee Burton, who was passed. But my son and I are leaning out the window. We're going by the playground in Lanesville, and we're excited. We see a little garter snake. And I impulsively pull the chain. The bus stops. I grab my son's hand, and I say, "We have to get off the bus and go deal with the snake." We do. Oh, look, it's there. We lean down. We're pushed back. The snake isn't little, it's huge. It's musky green. Its tail is 2 blocks down in Lanes Cove, and its head is 3 blocks up into Dogtown. I wake up. What was that about? One of my friends says, "Oh, Gail, green snake, that's about change." Thankfully, things don't change. Every once in a while, I think, get off the bus. Go deal with a snake. Whatever. So, about 2 years later, I have another rare, vivid, memorable dream. In this dream, I am crossing the cut bridge, and it starts to shake, and I'm thinking earthquake, and in despair, fear, I'm looking around. Out in the harbor is my snake. It's jumping in the water, it's making loop-de-loops in the air, and it's clearly the Gloucester sea serpent. And it's not alone, there are 2 other serpents jumping and diving. And I think, oh, they're playing. And my fear turns to wonder. Well, I wake up, and this time I know exactly what to do. I know the sea serpent is giving me a message, and I know what it is. I'm supposed to make a mural of the Gloucester sea serpent. So I start making maquettes, and my heart is strangely not in it. And I keep thinking, get off the art bus, cross the cut, and change. Not just change, big change, transformative change. I finally get it. I do it. I am over on the mainland for 30 years as a parish minister, till the sea serpent brought me back home. So, we have 2 questions here. The first question is, do I need to ask you for forgiveness? Let's put it this way. Have any of you not changed in the last 40 years? Raise your hand. Okay, I'm not going to ask for forgiveness. So the second question is, does the Gloucester sea serpent need to ask for forgiveness? Whoa. I think that avatar of change would say, sorry, all forgiveness requires change. May it be so.
Our next speaker is Calvin Cook. From words from my husband who works with him. He's been on many adventures, just got back from Alaska. He's a proud father, always has a story, super giving, a little like Santa Claus, always bringing in food for the staff. Give it up for Calvin.
Thank you so much. Nice to be here tonight. You obviously are a hard act to follow. I came here with a different vision for forgiveness. Grew up in Wakefield, Mass. I'm a Christian man, one of 7 children. Recently lost my mother in June, and she died in my arms in a Zoom Mass, receiving the Holy Eucharist. But my mother and I had been estranged for the last 25, 30 years. I had married a woman who was just like my mother, and they never seemed to get along. And it was funny, it was ironic, because they say you always marry your mother. And so they had the same issues, and one thing led to another, and I had a fractured relationship with her for 20 years. And being a Christian man, we know that Jesus Christ forgave all of us, and the last words he said pretty much were, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So back in September of 2020, COVID hit. She was in Brightview Nursing Home, assisted living in Wakefield. And there's 7 of us, and we decided to bring her home because she was really upset she couldn't see us because of COVID. So we brought her home, and each kid decided we'd take 1 day a week to take care of her. I got 2 days a week because one of my sisters lives in Seattle, and I volunteered for that extra day. In the next 10 months of her life, she lived her best life. She really enjoyed spending each day with a different kid. She got me twice a week, so that was a little tough, I think, but she learned to love me again. I learned to love her again. We mended all of those broken pieces that each and every one of us want to mend with, relationships that we struggle with, especially with family. It's tough when we have people in our life that we love that we can't communicate with. And so I worked hard with her, baking pies, teaching her how to recook, and being, friends again, playing cards, cleaning her house, cooking for her. And that healed a part of me that I will always be grateful for. We only have one mom, we only have one dad, we only have one life. And so I think a lot of us struggle sometimes with forgiving each other. So my whole take on this was trying to be a better Christian man and learning forgiveness. And by doing it with my mom, I feel like I can do more. And so I think if anything I can give you tonight is to challenge you to try to mend a broken relationship, try to be more forgiving. Try to go out there, especially in this Christmas season, and maybe knock on a door that you hadn't knocked on in a long time. Because we're only going to be here once. So if we can share love with one another, I think that's the greatest gift.
Our next speaker is Neely Spieler. Neely is a student currently in my class who just today expressed annoyance that I don't give A+. And so she actually prefers to be backstage, but I really begged her to come tell this amazing tale, and I'm going to give her an A+ for the effort, no matter how she does.
The worst day of my life was supposed to be great. I go to school. I have my last session with a therapist that I don't like very much. I open my first high school play, and it snows. I used to love the snow. I get home from a successful opening night of Radium Girls and lay down on the couch and watch Rachel Maddow on MSNBC with my mom. We sit there for a while, pretty much in silence, and suddenly I hear her go, "Hello?" I'm a little confused, so I look up and I see him. A man standing in my family room. I don't recognize him, and my first instinct is to hide in the black sweatshirt that I wore in order to not be seen from the sound booth. My mom tries to talk to him. He tells us that we're in his house. He really believes we're in his home. And my mom tries to talk him down, but to no avail. At some point, he crosses over to our pictures that are sitting on a table and starts to pick them up and throw them at us. He's using pictures of me and my family as ammo against us. After a bit of that, he crosses towards my mom, who is now on the opposite side of the room from me, and she signals for me to go get myself safe. So I start to run upstairs to get myself safe, and I hear a crash. And I turn around and I see a picture frame crashing over my mom's head. I run upstairs and call the cops, and I hide in my parents' bedroom closet with my older brother. I whisper to the cops my address over a fuzzy phone connection. It's a while before they get there and subdue the man on my parents' bedroom floor. He has a knife in his hand. This semester, I'm taking a creative nonfiction class. In this class, we're learning about the line between truth and fiction. Before, I thought that it was a binary. Either something's true or it isn't. After this, in this class, I learned that when multiple people go through an experience, they'll each come out with their own truth. Learning about all these different truths got me thinking about the worst night of my life. After this night, my mom was pretty quick to forgive the man. She wrote an article about a year after the attack and about forgiveness, about forgiving him. I felt betrayed and alone. I was not able to forgive him. I couldn't understand how she could. I was just thinking about myself. I was terrorized in my home. My life was profoundly changed. Why was my reaction so different from hers? She was thinking about his truth. His truth was that we were in his home. His truth ultimately ended up being that he lived the rest of his life in prison and died there of COVID. My reaction was about me. Hers was looking at all the different truths. I wish that I could tell you that after that, once I thought about that and realized that, I now look at every situation from every person's perspective, but I'm not a perfect person, so I don't. But this experience, one I don't think anyone should ever go through, pushed me to my limits of understanding of and empathy for other people.
See, Neely, that is A+. Our next speaker is Christine Mcdonald. Christine spent many years away from her home state of Massachusetts, being a psychotherapist in New York, and now she is very happy to be back in her home state, telling stories rather than working. Thanks, Christine.
I forgive my husband for not interrupting me. A love story. My favorite photo of my husband is a profile of him sitting on a beach in Hawaii, the sun shining behind him, giving him a white-blue aura. He's reading a book, wearing a baseball cap, and he's not interrupting me. I keep that photo framed in a red wooden frame on my desk. We had just played Scrabble, and we had played it on this travel-size Scrabble board with the little tiny tiles that we bought for our first vacation together. Oh, I love to play Scrabble. It doesn't require any strategy because I'm not very good at that. And the sun was shining and it was hot. And I laid out my first word, rose, and I used an R from his veracity. He studied the board, studied his letters, and laid out xylophone. He played to win. He interrupted my blissful leisure vacation with his competitive need to win. He's an interrupter. He's from New York. He's skilled in interrupting. He grew up in the streets of Queens to become a successful businessman. I grew up in Roxbury, born and raised, and I became a romantic. Always dreaming that I would meet somebody who thoroughly understood me and would finish my sentences with my words, not his. He interrupts. If I come home and I had seen a friend on the street, I come in and I say, hey, I saw Eileen. How was her vacation? Oh, did she like Iceland? Oh, and how is her dog doing after his operation? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Arlene and I weren't really interested in your concerns. We met in a yoga class in a resort in Tulum, Mexico. My friends had convinced me to take a solo adventure out of the country to break up my isolation. I was on a self-imposed hiatus from men. I had been addicted to dating scoundrels. One day, I took a bike, a resort bike, and I pedaled down the road into the jungle. And when I came back, I met him at the front desk, and he asked how my day was. He loves to tell the story now. I asked her how her day was. I figured she'd say, pretty good. She told me every detail, from waking up to getting the bike to riding down the road and finding a cenote in the jungle and running beside this truck full of Mexican teenagers, soldiers, waving machine guns and smiling at her. Oh my God, she could talk. Huh. I didn't realize how lonely I was. And he didn't interrupt me that day. When we left, he asked me if he could call me back in New York. And he wore a suit to our first date. He took me to a posh restaurant in Tribeca, and then he drove me home to Harlem. I mean, he lived in Brooklyn. It was totally out of his way. Consequently, he interrupted my sleep. I mean, when I get up in the morning and I want to make the bed, I go to his side and his sheets are tangled and they're hidden in a pile under a chaos of blankets. Before I met him, I slept like a corpse. Straight as an arrow from head to toe, with piles of perfectly placed blankets all around me. He bought me a weighted blanket, and I ended up cutting it in half down the middle so that he could free his legs from the grip. I sleep like a baby now, and I can actually move my body so he can spoon me. It was 20 years ago. He asked me to marry him. He knelt down on my linoleum floor in my kitchen and proposed. It was the eve of Thanksgiving. We were planning to go to his brother's house in Queens to spend the holiday with his family. There were a bunch of roses. There was a bunch of roses in my dirty brown sink, still covered in cellophane, and the stems were in a bowl of water. I assumed they were a gift for our hosts. And there he was, looking up at me and offering me a diamond ring. I don't remember saying yes. I got interrupted. I froze. That yes moment, gone forever. But he got up, grabbed the flowers, gave them to me. We hugged, we cried, we laughed. And I forgave him. And I forgive him every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Next up, we have Barbara Boudreau, writer, jazz singer, nature interpreter. I don't know what she can't do. Barbara.
A life of no regrets. I think that's really one of my biggest goals in life, is on my dying bed, my deathbed, is to be able to say, God, I wish I had done that. Or, oh, I wish I hadn't done that, right? And I think all of us want that, don't we? So with that in mind, I was speaking with a friend about several months ago, and she told me about this cleansing experiment she was doing. And she was planning to call people she had hurt in her life and ask for their forgiveness. And I thought, that is so brave, right? I mean, that really takes a brave person to do that. And I was so proud of her that that's what she was doing. And that kind of stuck in the back of my mind because I had one of those events that I really needed to apologize for. I was married before, when I was living in Montana for about 8 years, to a really wonderful man. I only marry wonderful men, with his phone up there. And we had a really good life. You know, we were both really outdoors people, and we're skiing and biking and rafting and backpacking and traveling and doing all these fun things. And we really had a good relationship and we got along, but we were on two different life trajectories. It was pretty clear. He wanted to have kids and live his life in Montana, where we lived at the time. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved Montana, but I wasn't sure that that was my trajectory. Have kids, live in Montana. I wanted to travel. I wanted to go all these different places and dive into different cultures and see all these things. So after about 8 years, it was sort of becoming clear, to me anyway. So I asked him for a divorce. And that is really a very difficult thing to do, but I'm sure it's very difficult to hear it on the other end. And divorce is messy, no matter what's involved with it. His family was mad at me, my family was mad at me, all the hurt and rejection that comes with that. And so time went by and things, healed. And about a year later, he met this really wonderful woman named Leslie, and they got married, and they had kids, and they still live in Montana. And we're friends on Facebook, which is really kind of cool. And I got to come here to Gloucester, the best city in the country, as far as I'm concerned, and meet my wonderful husband. We just celebrated our 26th anniversary. So everything worked out, right? But I still had this nagging weight that hung over me. So I went to the Fishtails in August at the North Shore Art Association, and at the end they announced the theme for the next Fishtails is forgiveness. And I went, oh God, now I have to do it. I have to do it, it's a sign, right? So I looked for his number and found it, amazingly. We had talked a few times over the years when my mom died, and his dad died, and his mom died, and my dad died. And I called the number with trembling hands, right? And I left him a message, thank God. I left him a message, and I said, I'm writing this book, which is not a lie, actually. I'm writing another book called Wanderlust, and it's about all the adventures I've had in my life. And he was part of them, some of them. So I wanted to get his permission to tell the stories. So about 2 days later, my phone rang, and sure enough, it was a Montana area code, and I went, oh God, here we go. And you know how that is when you hear the voice of a person that you were once close to, but you haven't talked to them in years? It's an amazing experience. It's like a wave of nostalgia and friendship and good feelings. And we chatted for a while, and it was great. And then I asked him about the stories, and he said, sure, you can tell the stories. And I said, I'll change the names. And he said, yeah, that's a good idea. And then finally I said, actually, the reason that I called was because I wanted to apologize for the hurt that I know you felt when I asked you for a divorce. And he kind of chuckled, and he said, you know what? I don't harbor any ill feelings toward you about any of that. He says, in fact, my kids know about you. They've heard stories about some of the stuff we did together, and my wife says, I can't believe you guys got divorced. It sounds like you had a great marriage. Anyway, so we chatted a little bit more and then hung up the phone. And it was amazing. There was sort of like this heavy blanket of weight that was just lifted from me for having done this one not terribly big thing, but it was important to me. So I highly recommend it for anybody who wants to try this cleansing ritual. And I know for one thing for certain, I will never regret having made that phone call. Thank you.
A year ago, Casey Breton, who's somewhere here in the audience, not that I can see you even if you waved, asked me to be the storyteller in residence. I'm a biology teacher, a doula, a magician. I mostly said at the time, yes, because I wanted to be able to put it on my resume, even though I never intend to apply for any job again. But the truth be told, telling stories, working on these stories has been such a therapeutic, healing, powerful experience. I literally called up my old therapist, and she's watched every one, and like we have discussions about the power of stories for therapy. It's way cheaper and much quicker. So in our last storytelling, we had a wonderful storyteller, Gab Watling, who has just her accent alone makes her great, but she's also a wonderful storyteller, wonderful person, a teacher, and it's now time for me to pass on the hook to Gab Watling, our next storyteller and resident.
Thank you, Gail. Okay, this is amazing. When Layla said, oh, and I have to give you the fish hook, I was thinking, oh, well, maybe it's a little porcelain thing, a little brooch. I had no idea until Layla came out with this astonishing thing. I have a million uses for this. I can tell you right now. I am never giving it up. I can also tell you that right now. I'm thrilled to be the next storyteller in residence. I look forward to standing on this stage 4 or 5 times, possibly next year. I look forward to finding the people who are going to tell the stories. And I look forward to finding people who will tell stories as brilliant as the stories that we have already heard tonight. Thank you so much, those who have already told stories. And we're looking forward to those who are still yet to tell their stories. So thank you.
Our next storyteller is Elizabeth Enfield. Elizabeth, when she was 8 years old, won a poetry contest, in which part of the prize was a live rabbit, which she had to take home to her apartment in the Bronx. Here she is 70 years later, I don't know if I'm allowed to tell her age, ready to tell us a new story about forgiveness.
Sawyer Free Library bag. And in it I have multiple copies of books that were on lists in all the high schools in this area. How it started was I lived in Rockport at one time in a converted garage with my son, and I was making dinner, and I heard him laughing upstairs through the floor, and I looked up and I said, "What are you laughing about?" And he said, "Oh, I'm reading Catcher in the Rye." I said, "Oh, that's a great book. Was it assigned or is it in class?" "Oh, no," he says, "it's not even on the reading list, it's banned." "Well, then how did you get the book?" "Well, Sean went up to St. John's this year, and he told me about the book, and he said, you've got to read this. It's really hilarious." So I thought, well, that's great. But why is it on the banned list? We were talking at dinner. He says, "I don't know." So the next day, as a good mother does, she got in her car and rode up to Rockport High School and went to the office and asked to see the principal. Well, the principal came out. He was very nice, and I told him about my son reading Catcher in the Rye, and I said, "But I heard that it's on the index of the Rockport High School book list. You're not allowed to read it." He said, "Oh, I didn't know that, but you'd have to speak to Mrs. Sullivan. She's the English department head, and she probably did it." I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Well, I'm going to have to make an appointment with her." So I took the list that he had given me of the books that they do ask the students to read, and I got in my car, and I drove to Gloucester High School. So I went into the high school, and I asked to see the principal, and he said, when I told him that there was a book, Catcher in the Rye, that was on the banned list in Rockport, and my son wasn't supposed to read it, I asked if they banned it also in Gloucester, and he went and printed out this list, and all these are supposed to be the lists of different high schools in the area. And there wasn't such a list with banned Catcher in the Rye on it. So I took that list, and I got in the car, and I said, "Well, we're not far from Manchester." So I drove up 127, which is a very scenic route, and I went to Manchester, and the sun was shining. It was a perfect day. I love to drive around and look around. And I went into Manchester High School, and I asked to see the principal. It was unbelievable. Everybody was available. Everybody. They printed out another list. I was supposed to bring these attached lists with little holes in it. You tear it off, and the pages were long all the way to the floor, but not out of those 3 high schools I went to, only Rockport had Catcher in the Rye banned. So I thanked the principal, took his list, got back in my car, and I go, well, it's not far. I'll go up to Ipswich. I'll go to Wenham and what's the other town? Hamilton, Wenham. It really has a good reputation. And I drove there, and I asked if I could see the principal. Oh, of course you could see the principal. He was available. They weren't doing anything. So, I mean, I really should have gone to the PTA, but I figured I am the PTA. I'm a parent. I'm a teacher. I was actually, got that degree. And I'm an association or a community. So I just can't take the time to go and have a meeting, and then they vote, and then somebody has an argument, and you go on for months. So I had to finish this. So they did the same thing. A list came out of this computer, draped on the floor, and Catcher in the Rye was not on the list to be banned. It was actually there as a reading book. And I go, well, we're not far from Georgetown. So I went to Georgetown. Same thing, they let me in. I can't believe it, nobody was busy. This is about, let's see, my son's 45. Well, he says he's really 46, because I don't remember. And he was probably 15, right? So that was like 30 years ago. So this is what I was doing. Same thing, they printed out a list. Everybody had these lists of books that you could read, and they recommended to the students, but they did not ban Catcher in the Rye. And I think that was the last school I went to. That's as far as I went. I took everything home, and the next morning I went back up to the school, and I asked to see the Rockport High School principal again. And I showed him all the lists, and I told him all the high schools I went to. And I said, nobody banned Catcher in the Rye. In fact, I read it when I was my son's age, but I was in New York City, and I don't understand this. He said, well, I guess you're right. I mean, if I do compare all the schools you went to, our school, I don't really understand why she took it off the list, and I'll think about it. But I think you should go up and talk to her. I said, okay. So I went upstairs, and Mrs. Sullivan, who's the head of the English department, came to see me at her office or her classroom, and I asked her about the book, and she goes, oh, well, a book, it can't be a classic until it's been read for 40 years. I said, well, I never heard of such a law. I'm like maybe, let me see, my son's 15, 30, I'm about 45. I think I read it 40 years ago, like when, I was his age. Doesn't that make it a classic? So she felt sorry, and I said, I've been to all the schools in the neighborhood, from here to Georgetown, Manchester, Ipswich, and nobody had it banned. So she accepted the fact that the principal was going to take it off the list, and she agreed that it could be read by the students, that she didn't want to. So later I went home and I told my son, he said, you what? You went to all the schools in Essex County? I said, well, there was nothing to do, and everybody was very friendly, and I like to drive around. I go antiquing, so it's okay. I mean, they were very nice to me, and look at all the lists I got. And he said, well, maybe you're right. He said, you know what they told me? They said she used to be a nun, and maybe that's why she did that, but she quit the nunnery and became a teacher. So I want to say that I really have to forgive Mrs. Sullivan, or Miss Sullivan, because she was a nun. And somebody, I think it was my son who told, or no, recently someone told me that she wasn't alive anymore. So I want to have you forgive me, and I will forgive you.
Our next speaker is Mark Warner. Mark thinks he's funny, even if others don't, but we do.
I have sensitive eyes. I was about 8 years out of college and writing The Great American Something. It was a terrifying moment when my mom would call and say, did you hear Ed Zier got hired by Shell? Patty and Steve got married. Are you taking care of your teeth? In that same frightening moment, someone I actually didn't know that well sent me this shirt. Said, what was it? Damn, I forgot to get a job. But I had a job. I was a lunch waiter at a failing Greek restaurant in Harvard Square. I had a one-bedroom rent-controlled apartment between Harvard and MIT, and I fancied I was getting an Ivy League education just by riding my bike back and forth. And what's more, Harvard had a dental school, and I could get cut-rate dental work, and I had a plan on getting it for free. One night, jogging around the Charles River, I had this shooting pain up the side of my head. I thought I was having a stroke. I got my wits about me. I ran home, and in the mirror, I pulled back my cheek, and there it was, the Hindenburg of abscesses, this fiery red pus pouring out of my gums and my teeth. I survived the night on Tylenol and wine, and the next morning, first thing, I called Harvard Dental School. And anticipating that I needed surgery and the fact that I had no money, I gave them a fake name. Clayton Meade, M-E-A-D-E. Yes, ma'am. I'm a Harvard student from Fair Lawn, New Jersey, and I'm gladly will call my parents' insurance numbers in later in the week. Worked like a charm. About an hour later, I'm in the swivel chair, and the Gestapo light comes down, starts heating my face and my brain, and then, hello, doctor. I'm sure you've heard it said that love can happen in dangerous settings. I don't know if it was the fear of being unmasked or this beautiful young woman having these whirring death machines in her hands, but I fell into a complete and immediate lust. Lust was love for a young man like myself, with Clayton Meade or me. As my mouth filled up with antiseptic and pus, it was a small price to pay for complete lust. Now, Melissa felt it too. There was no doubt we were going to get together. I had a place, and it was in the 90s. It was post-AIDS. And of course, I had to hear her story. She was very lonely, check. She was from California, check. She hated Harvard, check plus. All of it led up to a weekend of dizzying lovemaking, punctuated by runs for coffee and wine. There was only one problem. That Monday morning, something was coming at me. Lust or love? Love? My confusion was compounded by the fact that there was a woman who might be in love with a man who might be in lust or love, but wasn't using his own name. I ignored the phone messages for a few days, but I wasn't completely unprepared for coming home in my black and whites one evening, and there's Melissa sitting on the rotting wooden front porch steps. I let my bike drop, and I put my face in my hands, and I confessed. I said, I'm not Clayton Meade. I invented a person to get free dental care. I'm a lying, poor lunch waiter with no future to speak of. Where a normal reaction might be a slap or, you bastard, Melissa's face filled with this deep sympathy. She was amused and caring at the same time. And she said, I know that. I don't care. Life is messy. I know I'm a dentist. I'm not ready, I brayed. I even kicked my bike. I snorted. I brayed. I'm not ready. I don't even know who I am. I don't even know what love or lust is, whatever it is you want. She wasn't stupid. She said she wouldn't hold anything against me, and that was the last I saw of her. Now, having conflated love and lust, it's not completely reprehensible, no. But at that time, I carried a weight forward. I'd found and lost a soulmate. That was the whole of it. And that's what I needed to learn at that time. And it began a journey of self-forgiveness. I forgave myself. That equaled being forgiven. And in forgiving myself, that allowed me to fold up the past and live true into whatever dark unknowns were to come. I was forgiven for forgiving myself, for having held in my arms a true love, or lust, and having lost it. Not long after that, I got a job teaching at a local college, not Harvard or MIT, by the way. And what was immediately apparent was I loved being in a classroom, and the students loved me. Through my words, my smile, my body, I could make people feel good. And that's the skill I had mistaken as lust. Even teaching English grammar at a community college to international students, I could make people feel good. And so in the classroom, everything became love. Everything could be and would be and will be love. and that became my job. And I've been in a classroom, in and out of a classroom, ever since. Thank you very much.
Mark, you're really funny. Our next speaker is Terry Weber. Terry is I really just met her on Zoom, and she was amazing in our storytelling workshop. She's a longtime supporter of the Gloucester Writers Center and a longtime writer, new to the stage. Terry.
Today is my father's birthday. If he were alive, he would be 95 years old. Around this time of year, I find myself thinking about all the good memories of him, and some of the bad ones too. I remember reaching into one of his boxes that he had after he passed away. I was looking through his personal belongings, and I pulled out a pink envelope. Inside the pink envelope was a white card, and on it it said, "Be at my house, 6 p.m. on Friday. We'll have dinner and we'll be alone." At the very bottom was a heart shape and the letter J. I thought to myself, I better look at the other side of this envelope, make sure it's addressed to my dad. I turned it over. It was addressed to my dad, but it was to a P.O. box a few towns away from where we grew up. It was postmarked 1970, a year that he was married to my mom, and he had 7 young children at home. I think that was the first time I ever had a panic attack. In the middle of me shaking and sweating, jumping to conclusions, I thought I heard my dad's voice in my head say, no, stop, don't look through the rest of those boxes. You will never know the whole story of me or your mother by looking in those boxes. I love both of you. Well, like I often did, I promptly ignored my dad. I looked through more, and I found another envelope, but this envelope had her full name on the return address and her full address written there. I got up, I shoved those boxes into the corner of my bedroom. I shut the drapes. I just didn't want to deal with any sunshine for some reason. And I got on my computer. I Googled this woman's name, and I found out that she was living in Hawaii. And I thought to myself, this is convenient. I'd love to go to Hawaii. And maybe as part of my vacation, I may knock on her door, and when she opened it, slap her right in the face. I thought about that, and I found myself making a reservation, Boston to Honolulu. They were going to hold my reservation for 7 days. During that 7 days, I looked through all the boxes. See, those boxes didn't just contain mementos from a romantic relationship. They contained photographs from his own childhood, photographs of my childhood, lots of memories between him and my mother. I was everywhere when I was looking through those boxes. I went from being really angry to feeling admiration to anger. Admiration because those boxes reminded me that my father was a member of the greatest generation. At 17, he enlisted voluntarily in the Army to serve in World War II. That's a good man, the greatest, right? And those boxes also reminded me of my own childhood. He was the man who taught me how to ride a bike. He was the man who taught me how to play basketball. He was a scientist, so he taught me how to look in a telescope and see the night skies. I was really having a hard time reconciling the fact that here he was, this really brilliant man, an accomplished man, but he was also a man who lied, who was dishonest, who was flawed. As I sat there looking through everything, I had to ask myself, aren't I the same? Aren't I the same as him? I mean, I'm definitely not accomplished like he was, but I was flawed. At the end of the 7 days, I canceled my reservation. I decided at that time that I couldn't judge my father based just on this affair. I had to judge him as the whole person if I was going to judge him at all. As for this woman, it really wasn't going to help me to fly to Hawaii and slap her. I mean, even if I did do that, she could be bigger than me and really kick my ass. So I didn't want that to happen. My mother, though, I thought about my mother. I did feel angry for my mom, but I wondered if she even knew about this affair. I didn't know if she knew. If she did know, it would be up to her to forgive him. I did remember the voice in my head about my dad saying I would never know the whole story of him or my mother. Ironically, it took many years later of looking through their things to really even get to know my mother, her flaws, her secrets, and who she was as a whole person. But tonight is really just about my dad, and I'm actually asking for his forgiveness. I'm asking for it because, well, it's his birthday. He's probably not thinking this is a great gift to tell this story for him. He was also a very private man, and this story probably makes him uncomfortable should his spirit still be around. So if his spirit is still around, I want to say to him, Dad, it's okay that you had flaws. It's not okay what you did, but it's okay that you had flaws. I love you anyway, and happy birthday. Thank you.
I have to introduce myself. So I just want to say this: I'm the final storyteller, and after I tell my story, if we could just give a hand for all the storytellers tonight. I have to remember my story. Oh, you guys took me away. There's a famous line in the Bible that I'm sure all of you know: "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." There's several iterations of it, and in one of the iterations, the whole sentence reads, "You shall not take revenge. You shall not bear a grudge against your neighbor. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." This is a story about how I see those two parts of the sentence fitting together. I started my teaching career at Rockport High School, and after 4 years, I was lured to a small, progressive, independent school. I was blown away on my first visit to the school watching a student teach her classmates about artistic expression during the Black Plague. Students didn't raise hands in class. There were no grades. I was hired to be the science department chair, to design a science curriculum, and to teach. And it was like I landed in paradise. The school had a stream and a pond and woods, classrooms with wood walls or fireplaces, and teachers were encouraged to teach anything they were passionate about. My first year, I got this idea we should build a natural history museum in this little shed. And I asked students and parents to bring in roadkill. And no one balked as dead mammals and dead birds were delivered to the school. They didn't even complain when we skinned and stuffed a skunk, though the smell permeated the school for a good 3 months. Another year, I was teaching 6th and 7th graders about centrifugal force, and I looked at their confused faces and I said, "Come on!" And we walked out of the classroom, jumped in a van, drove to a nearby playground, and felt the force as we whirled round and round a merry-go-round. There were no permission slips. I'm not even sure I told the front office we were leaving. We did wear seatbelts on our way. When I look back at my first many years at the school, I remember it like I was a student there. My mind and soul were on fire. That's really where I learned to think, to write, to tell stories. But of course, there really is no paradise. And even in my first year, I experienced some of the dysfunction of the school. That year, I co-taught a class of 30 students with the man who would become the head of school the next year and for the rest of my career there. He was nice enough to me and supportive, not the most exciting teacher, and notoriously bad at meeting deadlines. Because there were no grades, we wrote very lengthy evaluations, and for the first trimester, I wrote all 30. I wrote all 30 the second trimester because by then I knew I was going to be on maternity leave at the end of the year. But he missed the deadline, and in a phone call to me, made it clear that he expected me to write the last 30 as well, which I did with my newborn on my lap. I was shocked when 2 weeks later at a faculty meeting, he took public credit for having written that last 30. Over time, his initial support of my teaching veered more and more into criticism, but not of my teaching, of my personality. He made it clear I was too loud, too direct, too willing to name the dark sides of the school, such as kids drinking and drugging. One year, as I was walking up the stairs to his office for my annual review, I naively thought, surely he will mention the aerial photography we did from a hot air balloon for our wetlands restoration project. But he didn't mention that at all. Instead, he spent 45 minutes criticizing me for something he acknowledged I hadn't done, but thought maybe I could have, and letting me know that I was the hardest person he knew to give feedback to. In January of my final year at the school, I was called to a small conference room between second and third periods. There, he told me that as of that moment, I was no longer department chair. I managed not to react, or at least that's how I tell it. I'm not sure that's true. Taught third period and immediately began looking for a new job. And I got a new job at a Jewish high school, and my career took off. I grew professionally in ways I didn't even know I needed to grow. I doubled my salary within a couple years. I had a boss who valued, challenged, and inspired me. And I was just really happy. But I had such a lingering rage at my former head of school. I had given my heart and soul to the school, and I felt like he just dismissed me. And I just couldn't let it go. Just even driving near the exit on the highway, my heart rate would go up. And this went on for years. I just couldn't let it go. And then one night, in a dream, he came to me, and he said something like, Layla, I really made a mistake. I should have never let you go. You were such a valuable teacher and community member. Will you forgive me? Yes, I said, yes, I forgive you. I woke up and I felt a little lighter, and I revisited the dream all that day and the next few weeks, and I know I made the whole thing up. I made up his ask. I even made up my quick yes, my yes. But I also forgave him. I really forgave him. Do not take revenge. Do not bear a grudge against your neighbor. I think perhaps is the how-to, but not for love your neighbor, for love yourself. Thank you. And could all the storytellers stand up and let's give them a round of applause. Storytellers. And audience, thank you so much for supporting Fishtails. Look forward to Gab's show sometime soon. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.